My name is Father Marcus Brennan, and I've been a priest for 30 years, and for 27 of those, I've performed exorcisms. Some of them, well, they were misdiagnosed cases, mental illness, desperation, fear. But a few of them, they still follow me. It started when I was still new to the cloth, just a few months out of seminary, full of purpose, half blind to the reality of what I'd signed up for. I was assisting Father Delgado, a man 30 years my senior and built like an oak tree in a cassock. His presence filled every room, not because he was loud, but because he'd seen things, real things. He'd served overseas, war zones, border towns, villages too small to name, and he carried with him the kind of stillness that only comes from surviving places that don't let you sleep at night. He'd seen evil long before it wore a face. We were called to a rural town in Missouri, population under 500, no cell towers, barely a post office. The family lived in an old farmhouse with wood rot around the baseboards and wallpaper that peeled like sunburnt skin. Their daughter, 17, had been acting strangely for weeks. According to her parents, she'd started mumbling under her breath, muttering in languages no one recognized. Latin, Greek, but also others, sharper tongues, brittle and broken, ones even the bishop's linguist couldn't pin down. She hadn't left the basement in 3 days, not to eat, not to sleep, not even to use the bathroom. When we arrived, I immediately felt off. The moment we stepped into the house, it was like the floor vibrated beneath my shoes, a dull, slow pulse that didn't match any sound. The family greeted us at the door, visibly exhausted. Her father, a burly man with oil-stained overalls and hands like sandpaper, refused to speak more than a few words. While his wife did the talking, her voice sounded soft, strained, and her eyes were red from crying. "She's not our daughter anymore," she whispered. The father just pointed toward the basement door and turned away. We descended slowly. The stairs groaned under our weight, each step sinking a little too deep. The deeper we went, the colder it became. Not just basement cold, but unnatural, like walking into a freezer that had been unplugged and forgotten. The air felt thick, like it resisted being breathed. The girl was in the far corner, back against the concrete wall. Her hair was matted with sweat and filth. Her fingernails were broken and dark, as though she'd been clawing at the floor. Her skin had a pallor that didn't seem like it belonged to the living. It looked gray, thin, and almost translucent under the flickering bulb overhead. But it was her eyes that stopped me. It was wide and cold. It locked on us from the second we stepped down, unblinking and smiling. I felt something twist in my gut. Not fear anymore, but worse. A bone-deep instinct, older than thought. Something that said, "Leave. Now." But Delgado didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his voice steady as he began the rite of exorcism. His Latin rolled out like thunder. A man used to wrestling darkness. She didn't blink or twitch. She just watched, smiling. Then, mid-prayer, she opened her mouth and spoke. Not in English, not in Latin, but in perfect Aramaic, a language that hadn't been spoken in over 1,000 years. It was ancient. She recited long, twisted verses from the Book of Enoch, verses that had been stricken from the official canon, verses that shouldn't have been known to her, to anyone really. I remember Father Delgado paused, mid-prayer, just for a second. It was subtle, a hitch in the breath, a slight tremble in his hand. That's when her nose began to bleed, then her ears, and then her eyes, dark trails running down her cheeks like black tears. And still, she smiled. Delgado gritted his teeth, raised the crucifix high, and shouted, "I command you, leave this child!" The girl's body seized. She arched back in a way that no spine should move, tendons pulling taut like wires about to snap. Her feet hovered off the ground by inches, as if something inside her was trying to lift her out of her own skin. Then came the scream, and I swear to you, it wasn't her voice. There were several, men, women, a child, all speaking at once, layered like voices bleeding through a broken radio. It echoed across the walls and pressed into our skulls like nails. The light bulb overhead flickered violently. One final surge. It exploded. Glass rained down on us in silence. And then, she collapsed. Delgado rushed to her side, still clutching the rosary so tightly his knuckles were white. She was breathing but faintly, shallowly, but she was alive. The smile was gone. Her parents came rushing in, sobbing, thanking God, hugging her, saying she was back, that their daughter had returned. But I couldn't move. I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw in her eyes during the rite. It wasn't pain. It wasn't rage. It was recognition. Later that night, back at the rectory, I asked Father Delgado what he saw down there, what he felt. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the wall and said, "Sometimes they're not trying to hide. Sometimes they want us to see them." He never spoke of that case again. And a year later, during another exorcism, he collapsed in the middle of the rite. A stroke, they said, was massive and irreversible. He died with rosary beads still clenched in his hand. Not every exorcism looks like what you see in the movies. Holy water, crucifixes, priests shouting Latin into the void, that's just one version of the war. Evil wears different masks in different lands, and in Thailand, it wears a smile. In 2014, I was invited to Bangkok for an interfaith symposium on spiritual healing. I'd been speaking about the psychological toll of exorcisms, how the spirit battles aren't just external, they eat away at the mind too. I wasn't expecting to be pulled into anything dark, just lectures, workshops, polite theological debate, but that changed on day 3. After my presentation, while others gathered for lunch, a young woman approached me quietly. Her name was Lita. She didn't smile, not the way locals usually do. She looked hollowed out, her skin pale and dry from stress, eyes glassy with exhaustion. She sat beside me without asking and whispered, "Something is inside my husband." Then she started to cry. Her husband's name was Arun. They lived in the outskirts of Chiang Rai in the north. He was a businessman who'd recently returned from a trip near the Myanmar border. Small villages, thick jungles, places that didn't always appear on maps. At first, it was little things. He forgot Lita's name during dinner one night. He said it like a stranger tasting foreign words. He'd wake up with mud under his fingernails and leaves in the bedsheets, though their house was spotless and locked. Then came sleepwalking. Every night, precisely at 3:33 a.m., he would rise, not groggy, not confused, but calmly, deliberately. He would stand in the corner of the bedroom, facing the wall like a child being punished, and whisper, "The bell is ringing, can you hear it?" The phrase never changed. And every time he said it, a faint sound would follow, something distant, metallic, and wrong. They visited doctors. Lita showed me videos of Aaron hooked to heart monitors and sleep labs. He never entered REM sleep, never blinked once during observation. They tried monks, spiritualists, even a Catholic priest who had retired in Chiang Mai. Nothing worked. Eventually, an elder from Lita's village told her something no one wanted to hear. He didn't come back alone. Something had followed him. Something old. And it was wearing Arun's body like a borrowed coat. I agreed to observe the ritual. It wasn't mine to lead. I was an outsider, a guest. But I needed to see. They brought me to a shrine behind their home. Wooden walls, paper lanterns swaying in the breeze, a scent of ash and sandalwood hanging in the air. It was dusk. The air felt too still. The monk leading the ritual was ancient, hunched with age and wisdom. His fingers were stained with decades of ink from handwritten prayers. He greeted me only with a nod, then turned to the shrine. Arun was already inside, sitting in a salt circle drawn meticulously on the floor. He didn't look violent. He didn't even look scared. He looked empty. His eyes didn't blink, not once. His mouth hung slightly open, lips dry and cracked. He hadn't eaten or spoken in 4 days. The monk began chanting in low, guttural tones. He threw dried rice into the fire, each handful sending sparks upward like fireflies. Symbols were painted in red ink along the walls, old ones I couldn't read. Older than Sanskrit. Older than language. Arun twitched. Once. Then again. And then he began to hum. It was melodic, not random, like a lullaby no one should ever hear. The notes rose and fell in a rhythm that felt wrong, off by just enough to unsettle the mind. My thoughts began to stray, then fold in on themselves. The monk's voice grew louder, more urgent. He clapped 3 times, fast and hard. Aaron's body began to seize slowly at first, like a puppet testing its strings. He whispered calmly, unnervingly soft, "The bell tolls. The bell tolls. The bell tolls." Then, without warning, his spine straightened with a snap. His arms jerked backward, and his head tilted to face the ceiling at an unnatural angle. And then, he smiled. That smile haunts me. It wasn't his. It wasn't human. It was too wide, too knowing. Then Arun turned, directly toward me and in perfect English, with an accent that sounded like it was mimicking humanity. He said, "You don't belong here, Father. This is not your war." Then slowly and with no hesitation, he bit off his own tongue. Blood spilled from his mouth as he collapsed backward into the salt. I moved to help, but the monk raised a hand, still calm, and produced a tiny bronze bell. He rang it once, the sound sharp and final. Then he shouted a phrase in Thai that made the air itself feel thinner. Arun gasped. His body jerked once, then again, and finally, it went still. When he woke up, minutes later, he was groggy, confused. No memory of what had happened, no memory of the bell. just exhaustion and tears. Lita threw her arms around him, weeping like she hadn't in months. She kept repeating, "You're back. You're back." The monk didn't celebrate. He simply sat cross-legged in the corner, whispering more prayers into his palms. Later that night, he told me the thing that had possessed Aaron wasn't a demon, not in the way I'd been trained to understand. It wasn't hellish. It wasn't infernal. It was older. A force. Something bound not to sin or evil, but to sound, to resonance, to rhythm. He said something I've never forgotten. We all carry echoes inside us. Some of them are not ours. Some of them are waiting to ring again. It's been years, but sometimes I still wake up at 3:33 a.m. and I swear I can hear it faintly, but it's getting louder. You get used to losing. That's the part they don't tell you. You can spend weeks preparing for a single case, prayer, fasting, learning the subject's history, tracking symptoms, and still, something gets through. I met Hannah in a hospital psych ward, under lockdown, a 13-year-old. The doctors said it was schizophrenia, auditory hallucinations, and trauma. But I knew that stare, that 1,000-yard look that doesn't belong in a child's eyes. The kind that doesn't blink when the lights flicker, the kind that's already seen something else. It started small, according to her mother. Talking to corners, drawing symbols on the bathroom mirror in toothpaste at first, then nail polish. She said Hannah claimed it wasn't her reflection anymore, that it blinked when she didn't. Then came the night terrors, screaming fits that shook the walls, then the voices. They say her mouth was moving, but the words weren't hers. I was asked to intervene after 3 nurses quit on the same shift. They said they saw her face change in the dark, like something pretending to be human and not doing a great job of it. When I entered her room, she was staring at the ceiling, tracing invisible shapes with her fingers. She smiled when she saw me, not with innocence, but recognition. "You're late," she said. "He's already here." I felt it instantly. A pressure, like the air in that room was listening. I've done over 50 major exorcisms in my life, and this one felt different from the start. Not a battle, but a test. She didn't resist the prayers, but laughed through them. "He says Latin's a dead language," she giggled. "That's why you always lose." She repeated the prayers back to me perfectly, even corrected my pronunciation once. "It's Spiritu Sancto, Father, not Spirito. Careless of you." I spent 3 days with her, with no progress. I fasted. I prayed. I begged. But whatever had taken her, it didn't fight back because it didn't need to. It had already won. On the 4th night, I found her standing by the barred window. The moonlight caught her face in such a way that her eyes looked hollow. Her pupils were wide, and her hands twitched like they were receiving a signal. Then she whispered, "He's going to wear me now. You can't stop it. But thank you for the prayers. He likes the taste of guilt." She turned and smiled with all her teeth. An hour later, code blue. She'd bitten through her own tongue and choked on the blood, just like Aaron. But this time, the body died. and something else moved on. The moment her heart stopped, the emergency lights flickered. A nurse screamed and swore she saw a second shadow crawl out from under the bed and slither toward the door. They found nothing. I wish I could tell you that was the end, but I still see her sometimes. Not Hannah exactly, but people who look too long when I pass. Strangers whose faces don't change when they blink. A whisper on the subway, in her exact tone. He likes the taste of guilt. Sometimes when I walk into confession, I get this overwhelming smell of iron, sharp and fresh, even when the place is empty. Sometimes when I speak a prayer, it echoes back wrong, just slightly, just enough to know I'm not alone. I failed her. That's the truth of it. And maybe that's why it follows me now. Not to punish, but to wait, to see if the door is still open. Sometimes I dream about the ward again, only this time, she's not the one in the bed. I am. And she's standing over me, whispering in a tongue I can't understand. Except for one phrase: wear the skin, leave the guilt, ring the bell. I think about that more than I'd like to admit, especially at night. Especially when I hear a girl's voice whisper from inside the confessional, long after the church has closed. Forgive me, Father, for you have sinned. After 30 years in this cloth, I met something I couldn't name. Not a demon, not a spirit, but something older. And I don't think I won. It let me go. Because evil doesn't always kill. Sometimes it waits. If something calls your name in the dark, don't ever answer.